It's John Kearon, Chief Juicer of Brain Juicer, and I have the pleasure of chatting with Grant McCracken. Hello, Grant.
Hey, John, how are you?
Grant, tell us your latest project, because I mean you have done many, and I'm sure you are involved in many. But give us a quick update on what your latest thing is.
Right. Several things, actually. One is trying to persuade people in the entertainment industry that they ought to use what I'm calling the Kauffman Continuum as a way to think about the content they create for Hollywood movies, TV shows, and things like that. And so I was in Banff, which is Canada's Centre for Media Work. It's the place that people sell projects and get funding for projects. And so I was saying, listen, there's this physicist in the desert at the Santa Fe Institute who's created this idea. It's a kind of model for order, and it actually works quite nicely as a model for constructing cultural content when people sit down to make movies and to make TV shows especially. And the notion here is that we live in this extraordinarily diverse culture. We have many points of view, and one of the great foundations of our diversity is the fact that we have lots of really early adopters who are fantastically sophisticated when it comes to their media consumption. And then we have lots of people like me who are somewhat less sophisticated, later adopters, as it were. And so this Kauffman Continuum, I'm arguing, is a way to speak to both groups.
This is the first time I've heard of the Kauffman Continuum, but he is a physicist.
He is a physicist. He was at the Santa Fe Institute until quite recently, and now I think he's running some experimental something or other in New Hampshire. So I'm not exactly sure where he is at the moment, but for a long time he was at the Santa Fe Institute.
Okay. Well, this is gloriously Grant. I mean, this is very you. So you've taken something which you have spotted could make a contribution, be something useful in the shaping and understanding of culture and how things spread through culture. There's obviously already the diffusion curve idea in marketing, early adopters to the laggards. But is there something in the Kauffman Continuum that's different to that?
Yes,
tells you,
I think so. First of all, I should say that I'm working without the permission of Kauffman. I think I'm well off, off license. I'm well off I'm well out of the ballpark that he created. His famous book is At Home in the Universe, and he says, listen, we've misunderstood what order is, especially in evolutionary circumstances. He says that species survive when and this is where I think all of us, and I love your work on innovation, and I hope at some point we'll have a chance to talk about your work on the Unilever Innovation Institutes. But so he says, listen, order is something that comes from, let's call them creatures of any kind, organizations or species, that are messy and multiple, and that respond to the world by being messy and multiple. So I'm saying, okay, well, listen, if this is true, at any given moment, that everything at its moment of cultural creation is maximally unformed. It's just it's a bee in somebody's bonnet. It's a filmmaker in Alphabet City in New York City who is using a new technique that not even his best friends understand, and he doesn't quite understand it, frankly. It's just interesting somehow, and he's made a 15-minute film that is, well, frankly, incomprehensible. But that gets into the circuit of that gets into film off Broadway kind of film festivals, very obscure film festivals, and it gets picked up, and eventually it something like it shows in Telluride, the festival, and then eventually it gets more formed and better understood and used with more confidence and more clarity by somebody submitting to Sundance, and it gets picked up there and absorbed and made more formed, and it appears in the Toronto Film Festival, and then eventually it becomes part of the lifeblood of Hollywood, and it shows up in a Michael Bay blockbuster-like transformations.
And so that's your sense of the order emerging from the the individual chaos of creatures, but each having a knock-on, if you like, a copying with a twist,
Exactly.
with a twist, and it maybe
copying with greater clarity. So the thing becomes
clarity. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the key word here is forming. It's totally unformed at one end of the continuum and utterly overformed at the other end of the continuum. And so for TV watching purposes, there'll be some people who are very, very sophisticated, need almost trace elements of narrative to understand what's happening on the screen. Those are early adopters, and they like stuff that's totally unformed. And then there are other people. Then there's an entire continuum of people. It runs right down to people who need that kind of doctor exposition who comes in and tells you what just happened and what's happening now.
But if I pick it up, kind of right, as you say, the continuum starts with, if you like, the artistic community, the radical, the non-conformed. I mean, that's where it's at its spikiest and least formed.
Exactly.
And then you get copying with form. So constant forming until in the end, at the other extreme, you get conformity. This is the way that all Hollywood movies must be. This is the stuff. These are the formulas that, and they're in, and how you get from one to the other is the Kauffman Continuum.
Totally. And so you end, beautifully put, and I wish you were writing this idea, not me. But so eventually the thing becomes a genre. Right. And in the case of American television, the police procedural, I think too, perhaps for British TV, and the Law and Order show has become a genre within a genre. And it's extremely well formed. I mean, you can literally set your watch to the moment when one of the detectives is going to make a bad pun. And so this stuff gets really fantastically overformed.
Well, let's. I mean, because maybe that is the point, to bring in the kind of innovation centers that, not just Unilever. I mean, I wrote about Unilever, but it's the same with Nestle and P&G and all the very large organizations that certainly would love to be innovative because they see profit and success comes from it. I mean, that's been their history, but they're not great at it. I think the record would show. And I don't know. I mean, I know you are very interested in this area. What are the parallels? What can these organizations learn?
Yeah. Well, this is one place where I'm working on two ideas that are not at this point very well connected, but that's just, I guess. So I loved what you were doing on the Unilever, your study of those innovation center models, and I loved your argument that said, listen, the Unilever models are too centralized and evidence-based and too much like marketing science, actually, to be capable of this very difficult thing called innovation. Remember that the album title for the Talking Heads did an album probably 20 years ago called "Stop Making Sense." This is the nature of the problem from an anthropological point of view, is that innovation is paradoxical to the extent that it asks us to use ways of thinking that our present ways of thinking make extremely difficult for us to create and embrace.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's got to be the problem that's part of the problem with innovation, the innovation centers you're talking about.
And it's why innovation happens much more naturally, or just naturally, at the fringes. It is at the, to connect the two conversations, it is at the radical, non-conformist, weird, frankly, but certainly the fringes of life, when new thinking is basically seemed normal almost to them, but is abnormal to the conformist world, but therein lies the place for innovation.
Exactly. And that's what the new book that I literally just finished yesterday is called Culturematic, and it's about little machines for making meaning that are almost all of them characterized by this. If you say to somebody, why exactly are you doing this PyLab or this Web 2.0 or Burning Man or the Gatorade replay? marketing campaign, if you say, okay, tell me why this is a good idea, why are we investing our time and our money here? The answer almost is exactly what you get from avant-garde artists. I can't tell you exactly. It just vibrates in some way that tells me it's got to be useful. So I guess what I'm doing here, and I hadn't thought this through before, is that the Kauffman Continuum stuff is sort of saying to people who make culture, don't forget the late adopters. Here's a model that says you need to include them, and then the Culturematic book is really an effort to kind of catalog in a very medieval kind of, let's just look at all of the instances here and see if we can't capture a kind of cultural logic for these acts of innovation that take place on the far margins.
Wonderful. And I mean, your previous book, The Chief Culture Officer, is Culturematic almost the instruction manual for the Chief Culture Officer, or is it not quite that connected?
Well, some of it. I guess what I was reading Andy Grove's book. He's the CEO for Intel, and he was saying, listen, strategy and planning are dying. It's increasingly difficult for us to tell what the future holds. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is an argument for the Culturematic as a kind of, to use the language of Errol Morris in that famous 90s documentary, Cheap, Fast, and Out of Control. That's what a Culturematic is. It's a little experiment that you just fire into the future, and you send lots of them into the future with the perfect, I mean, they're exactly like space adventures. Many of them will never phone home. They're not going to hit anything out there in the future, but a few will hit, and they will phone home. And when they do, you'll get some early warning of what the future holds. So I'm sort of saying, let's take seriously the proposition that the future is going dark. What kind of innovation works? And so you're on page 20, where I say, here's John talking about the frustration that happens for a very skillful corporation like Unilever, which, as you point out, is responsible for creating not just important new products, but entire product categories. Here they are struggling with this idea of innovation because they're kind of doing it in the big institutional way instead of embracing cheap, fast, and out of control. So I love it.
Well, Grant, good luck with Culturematic. When does it come out?
Thank you. Not till this time next year, roughly. So it's not being very Culturematic.
I think you're right. The publishing industry needs a bit more of that cheap, fast, and loose kind of exactly. Out of control. But anyway, we'll get there. Yes. Grant, great to catch up. And
my pleasure, John. Thanks for including me.
Thanks for listening to Brain Juicer Bites. For more about Brain Juicer, visit our website, brainjuicer.com.